Sony, Sony. Man, PlayStation, they've been a little ridiculous here lately. And, I think a lot of you know what I'm about to talk about. I actually want this Activision thing deal to end. I don't care how it ends at this point. I feel like all of we've been talking about for the past 6 months to a year is Microsoft buying Activision. Microsoft buying Activision. It was pretty bad from the start. It didn't even really have to involve PlayStation much of any, because I like to, focus a little bit more on talking about games than talking about whether or not Microsoft's going to buy Activision. But it got worse. For those of you that don't know, obviously, I'm sure most of you know, Sony doesn't like the fact that Xbox and Microsoft is trying to buy Activision because of Call of Duty. Look, I think there is a little bit more to it than Call of Duty, but I think Call of Duty is the prime example of why they don't want this to happen. Now, for those of you that's wondering, why would they care if they buy Call of Duty? Why would they care what happens to the Call of Duty name? They make so much money. When I mean them, I mean Sony and PlayStation. They make a ridiculous amount of money off of the promotion deals that they have of Call of Duty. They make money off of the cut they get. They get 30%, I believe, off of every sale that happens on PlayStation when it comes to Call of Duty. Think of the microtransactions. Think of all the stuff going on at Warzone. PlayStation gets a cut of that. And that's one of the things they're not trying to get rid of. I think the biggest reason that I just want this over with is because at this point, even if it gets blocked, I'm going to say it, even if Microsoft gets blocked and they cannot buy Activision, Blizzard, and King, at this point, I'm okay with it. Let's just go back to talking about everyday stuff. Tired of talking about this stuff over and over again. And the crazy part is I don't even think it would be as bad if PlayStation would just want to compete. The part that blows my mind is PlayStation doesn't want to, form and build a studio or maybe have an existing studio. They do own Bungie, by the way, the people who originally made Halo, and they don't want to have to compete with Call of Duty if something goes wrong with Call of Duty. And what I mean by going wrong is, look, right now it looks like they have 3 years. 3 years is how much time Microsoft has given them past the initial 2 years remaining on their contract. So we're looking at 4 to 5 years. That is the amount of time that PlayStation has to come up with an excuse why their games isn't doing the way it is. It's pretty much to figure out what to replace Call of Duty with if Microsoft determines that they do not want to continue to put that game on their platform. And that's a huge issue. We've seen over and over again, Jim Ryan is huge on money. He cares about money more than anything else. That's the reason he's putting stuff on PC. Now, it's not day and date, but he's also said he's going to put these games as a service games on PC. So that's taking away from the PlayStation brand. So clearly he cares about the PlayStation brand, but only because it brings him revenue to make his metrics look good at the end of every quarter. So at the end of the day, look, PlayStation, just deal with it. Look, I want this deal to go through regardless if they pass it or not. I just want it to be over. I feel like this will insinuate competition, and maybe PlayStation will over there talk to Bungie, be like, look, we need you guys to make a game that can rival Call of Duty. They already have one a little bit with Destiny. Now, obviously, Destiny is probably a little bit past its prime, but I feel like they can easily get another one. Destiny and Bungie are very competent developer. It's a very competent developer, and I think that Bungie could easily find something to replace Call of Duty. But you can replace the game, but the question is, can Bungie and Sony and PlayStation replace the brand known as Call of Duty? It's debatable. It's subjective. I don't think they can. That's a huge brand, and it's a hard brand to replace. It's just, look, I get annoyed with the whole scenario because it's just like, Sony, why are you over here saying that you want people to look at this deal, or you don't want games to go to Game Pass when it comes to Call of Duty? You don't want the version of Xbox to be better when it comes to Call of Duty, when these are practices you've been doing for years. It's very frustrating when a company is contradicting themselves at every corner. They will sit there and go out there and scream on the highest building they can that they don't want any time-to-time exclusivity when it comes to the Call of Duty brand, but they just got Silent Hill too. They're hypocrites. That's all they are. I feel like this is the worst PlayStation has looked in years, maybe generations. Maybe they've never looked this bad. And part of me is just like, if this deal doesn't go through, what happens at that point? I know a lot of people want Microsoft to buy Activision so we can move on to see exactly what they do with the Activision, Blizzard, and King names on top of their brands they currently have. But my mindset's like, if this doesn't go through, what's Microsoft going to do? They're just not going to invest any of this money? Keep in mind, inflation keeps going up. They're just going to let that money sit in the bank? Sure, they're going to lose probably a couple $1 billion in the deal itself, but there's still a bunch of money that they were going to give Activision that's just going to sit there. They could invest it into industries that isn't gaming, but part of me is just like, they're pushing a lot into the gaming industry. That's why they bought Activision, Blizzard. That's why they even invested in the first place. So I don't think that's the option. I think they will reinvest in the gaming industry. But I think the biggest thing that I'm tired of hearing about this every day, every week is just like, a lot of it's from PlayStation. They come out there, they scream the soapbox, they kind of scream that they're the victim. No, you're not. You created this industry, Sony. You're the one that went out there and got timed exclusivity on Destiny guns, Destiny strikes. And then when those timed exclusivity started to end, you're the one that went out there and doubled down and got them for another year. You got Forspoken. You got that game, 2-year exclusivity. You got the games that you got from Bethesda. Keep in mind, they tried to get Starfield, but Microsoft was able to snatch that company before they were able to successfully come up with a deal. So they could have had that, maybe, if Microsoft wouldn't have been poking around there to buy it. They got Ghostwire Tokyo. They got Deathloop, which finally came out on Xbox. And, you know, I've always been on IOP. I've always been on this channel. Timed exclusivities matter. They can give you huge arm up in the race. Just depends on what timed exclusivity you have. Look at something like Persona 5. That's not made by Sony. They don't own that brand, but that game has put them in a better light with people that like turn-based Japanese JRPGs. And that is what they're looking at now. They got Final Fantasy VII Remake. Pretty much that whole franchise on lockdown. That's a big game. Exclusive on their platform. Timed exclusives matter. Exclusives in general matter. And Sony clearly sees that. But the amount of money they make off Call of Duty is the reason they're not talking about Overwatch or anything. There's a lot of money they're going to lose periodically throughout the next couple years, because I think that's the key thing here. They're not worried about the short term. What they're worried about is, right now, we might keep these people in Game Pass. Well, not Game Pass, Call of Duty. We might keep them on our platform. But who to say what happens in a couple years from now when they consistently keep getting people over to the Xbox ecosystem, or maybe even Game Pass PC, and they're getting people in that subscription service for $10 to $15 a month. They see the market shifting, because I've said it a couple times. It is not a coincidence, in my personal opinion, that for the most part, who has owned that marketing Call of Duty has always won the generation. Sure, there's other variables that take into place. It's not just Call of Duty, but Call of Duty's always been a huge factor in who wins that generation. They don't want to lose that marketing, and they don't want to lose that money they get from Call of Duty. And I get that. I respect that. But Sony, stop being hypocritical and contradicting yourself. Go out there and have good points why you feel this deal shouldn't go through, and stop acting like a victim. Addict out.